Though we come from different places geographically and approach education from diverse vantage points, we share important social commitments and particular visions of what is possible in schools and communities. While we might not subscribe equally to the whole of the long-standing progressive agenda, a principal basis for the original formation of the study group, we tend to agree on at least some of the following formulations: that children and young people possess unlimited potential for making personal meanings of the world, that powerful learning is within their grasp, that creative energies are universal, though too often unacknowledged and unsupported, that responsibility, a sense of personal and community empowerment, is capable of being cultivated. That teachers can be curriculum builders, decision makers, serious students of teaching. That it is possible to conceive education as expansive, as intensely personal, and simultaneously cooperative, as living and interpretive and imaginative. That constructive pluralism and democracy are possible, worth struggling to support. And that the long-time promise of equality, along with personal and community well-being, needs and can be translated into reality.
I want to thank Brenda. Is Brenda here? You know, I told you this over eggs and pancakes upstairs, but when I read Brenda's chapter, oh, then I can't see you. When I read Brenda's chapter in that beautiful book, Holding Values, I just thought, oh my God, I have to bring some of my students here, right? Because I have brilliant students whom you've met in the room, Angeletta and Rosemary Roberts and Jen Ayala, and Thea was already coming. And I've learned more from all of them than I've taught them. But I realized that they're teaching in ed schools, and they might not know that there's oxygen somewhere. And when I read your piece, Brenda, it felt like an oxygen tank to me. I thought they need to know that there are spaces and histories and people who have talked about education in very different ways than the kind of toxic winds of standardized testing that they're not hearing.
You know, education and everything, you know, of course, I'm all for changing it, but where's the youth? We're the ones receiving the education. So we need to collaborate on, you know, we're the ones being educated. How can you help us, you know, and how can we help you get that extra step in the education? And man, y'all need youth.
It felt like there was a part of where we were feeling as though we were constantly being defeated, and we were always saying that other people weren't getting it. And my feeling was, maybe we aren't. Maybe we aren't saying it and thinking and connecting up with people in the way that we should. That the challenge is for us to think and speak differently, not to change the basic tenets that Vito talked about, but how do we think about them differently, express them differently, show them differently, so that we can create a new kind of alliance amongst people with those shared values and principles.
You were saying, you know, that the test scores and everything's so you want to change it. And I was thinking, well, you know, some of my friends say this. Some of the kids that stop by the office, we have conversations about this. Like, oh man, this test isn't for us. You know, I have to go home to do a standardized test, so to graduate. So, you know, we're working here, but we're not working here together.
I think there's been a slippage in our faith in the qualities that Vito outlined. And I think it's been among ourselves, and I think it's inevitable that we're impacted on by the world we live in.
There's a part of this idea of faith, what drives us to do this work, that I often think is not present here. That's why I always love the Hoffmans when we would do the Sabbath. There's something that's very instructive about the connection to one's faith, one that allows you to be able to laugh and have an optimistic view through a horrible tragedy, one that allows you to sustain yourself through difficult times and stay committed to your work. And I've often thought about that notion of faith as something that we really, it would be interesting for us to talk about faith, not in a religious sense, but in a really a universal sense of what is it that drives us to do this work.
When I immigrated, I was 7, so I was kind of forced to start my childhood at 7 in a new country and forget about the past. So when I was remembering, I was like, oh man, I don't want to remember, you know, the very few memories that I have. You know, again, I was taken out of my comfort zone today, and I was challenged. And I was like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. But it makes my voice crack because, you know, that was a lifestyle that was, you know, said to be forgotten. And you started, you know, when you came here in my new childhood.
The conversation has been very, very enriching over the last 5 years around this topic, precisely because it was very informal, and people that came into the room could focus it whatever way they needed to, and that for me has been a really important thing. The second thing is that I really want to be able to speak in my own language in my group and not feel like I'm excluding anyone. And because of the large title of people of color, often it isn't the case that people who speak another language can speak in their group. So I'm offering the need to have groups that want to speak in another language, not exclusively my own, but that there might be groups who just want to speak their language together. And that's a big issue for people who are bilingual, because often that part of us has to be silenced in order to communicate with the rest of our group. So next year, I'm going to be in a group, and I'm going to only speak in Spanish. I may be by myself, but that's what I'll do.
My oldest brother, William, has Down syndrome. And my mother, who is raised in the segregated South, decided, you know, I'm going to ask for everything that these parents ask for, because I know that if I try to go in alone, that I'm not going to get what this child needs, because at the time they didn't know how to educate. They told my mother that he would never know who she is, and he would never, you know, live independently. So this group of mothers, they organized themselves, they met in each other's homes, and they call themselves Project Hope.
They brought together a group of participatory activists from around the globe that we got to work with. These are like young people who are in like the bottom class color caste of their community.
And they met and said, okay, they noticed that the children were interacting and they were learning from each other. And they said, oh, well, you know what, let's hire or find someone who will, you know, work with our children preschool, you know, provide some preschool services. And that continued from preschool until they were able to go to, you know, enroll in regular school. But
the young Dalit woman said, I don't know if this is discrimination, but in my community, because life is so hard, the men get drunk every night and they beat the women, and then the daughters stay home to take care of our moms, and that's why we don't go to school. And the lawyer next to me says, that's not discrimination. I said, that is too. We're counting that.
I realize now, after that experience, how that had such an impact on me now and the type of work that I'm doing.
So at day 3, Aliou, my very favorite young man from Cameroon, stands up and says, I've had a wonderful 3 days, and with all due respect, I'm really looking forward to us going home and doing this work. And then in April, we're supposed to go to Geneva. He says, but I don't believe in Geneva. Isn't that great? He said, I just don't believe in Geneva. I've been a trophy in people's human rights campaigns for years. And I want to make sure this work speaks back to my community, right? And so a bunch of us have written a paper called Do You Believe in Geneva, of course. And I just got an email the other night saying they decided not to go to Geneva because they knew it would be a sham. But they want to get together under the Manhattan Bridge and eat bagels again, because there was some version of critical globalization work that was horizontal, not vertical, that they really dug. But the idea of praying to some human rights commissioner, who's basically your city council person, sitting in Geneva, is not a good idea. So I think stringing these together, it's you know, you're the best version of that I know in the world.
Race and issue has always been a part of the North Dakota study group's focus in dealing with that. But within that finds, people of color were not appreciating how it had been attacked, presented. How can you have these big ideas and then not hear the voice of people of color? I don't think that enough, whatever we're trying to do, even though it is very difficult to articulate and very difficult, we know that there was a need. We tried to just address that need, and it's working to some degree, and we're not there yet. And it's fluid.
It's really hard to stay on this topic. We could talk about gender a lot more easily, we could talk about class a lot more easily, but somehow race and racism are really difficult to talk about.
We thought that for people of color, there is value in sharing things in a setting with others who are like you in a lot of ways in terms of how you perceive and live in the world. We thought that there is a different kind of comfort level in expressing oneself and making sense of experiences. We thought that there are conversations that happen in the small, more homogeneous groups that can never happen in the mixed group because we as people of color censor ourselves. We thought that there's always this negotiation or struggle that we have in mixed group settings when talking about race, where we feel that we have to take care of the people who are not of color in the group. And so we think that it's important for the larger group, North Dakota Study Group, to push the button of race even amongst like-minded people for social injustices in schooling, and to examine deep and painful parts within ourselves in order to be able to do that work in the larger world. Finally, we thought that the smaller groups can be spaces of courage building, hence why I am up here.
See, I sit in the white groups and I know how hard it is to get the conversation going, and that's here and that's other places, and it's just hard to get the conversation going. And as I was listening to Greta and Louisa and Miguel and others, I'm thinking, okay, part of what this is about is that we white folks don't know how to talk about this yet, and for the, shall we say, obvious, quote-unquote, reasons, you do. And that in a real way, I think, in our society, white people come to this as a choice, and it's not a choice if you're a person of color in a certain sense. And it's just as a result, a very, very different conversation. And so it may be that people of color, however you want to, maybe by language sometimes, or however that's structured, you don't need any kind of an agenda set up in a way, okay? But maybe we white folks have to figure that out.
So one night I went over to my parents' house, and my mom said, I told them about the story that we were going to run, and my mom said, Jay, you can't run that story. And I was like, well, Mom, why not? And she said, well, what are they going to do to me? I might lose my job, I'm going to get fired. And I was like, no, Mom, I need to run this story. This is extremely important that the community knows about what's happening, And, I was really surprised actually at the level of fear that it was growing within her because of a story like this. And so I sat down with her and I talked to her about how, this fear that she had was a product of this misguided leadership that we had. The fear that she had was because of that bad leadership. And what I was trying to do then was to take away that bad leadership or expose that bad leadership so that she wouldn't have to be afraid anymore.
It doesn't matter where you live or what the color of your skin is or, what your economic background is. Everyone has a story, everyone has an identity, and I think everybody's, own educational experience can be framed around that. But it's so critical, especially in marginalized communities.
Jamie, she was good at about everything in life, except that she was not good at anything in school. She has the very same learning disabilities now as an adult that she had in first grade and sixth grade. They didn't go away, but she's managing a horse farm, and she's got a daughter, and since I live in this town, I run into her all the time, and she's got a terrific adult life and a college diploma. In the world of Massachusetts, where I live today, she could not have gone to a state college because there is no way in the world she could have passed the state test in 10th grade. And there is a law in our state that if you don't pass that state test, you can't go to a state college. Luckily, Jamie got out before that small-minded world had started.
We need to go back to our roots, work directly with grassroots organizations, start there at that level where the agitation begins.
Harriet Tubman said at the end of her very long life, keep going.